feel like a rock star. This is my favorite talk, so I'm happy to be here. I feel like it's the billionth time I've given this talk in the last year, but I rewrote it just for you guys. How many of you know me from the shelter medicine class? Awesome. How many of you, is this the first time you're hearing about shelter medicine, our program? So glad to meet you all. I'll see you in a couple months in your population health block. And come on down and talk to me if you're interested in learning more about shelter medicine, since I don't get my clutches on you as readily in the new curriculum. So I want to start with a little thought exercise. How many of you read some of the articles in the last couple of weeks about the new study about cats killing birds at record setting up? So what if I told you I got a huge grant and I was going to equip you all to deal with cats in some kind of decisive way? And I sent each one of you home with a carrier and a trap and a dart gun with a lethal dart. Loaded, locked and loaded. And when you arrived home, a couple doors down, you saw this cat. What would you do? How many of you would whip out your dart gun and shoot her dead? Good. Mike. How many of you would go see if she's friendly, and if she's friendly, put her in the carrier and take her to the animal shelter? Okay, thank you. How many of you, if she's not friendly, would lay out that trap her and take her to the animal shelter? How many of you would just go in your house? So a lot of us are pretty comfortable. So it seems like the majority of us are pretty comfortable with the idea that if there's a healthy cat that's out and about in the world, doesn't necessarily need an immediate intervention unless there's evidence that there's some kind of problem associated with it. Certainly in this room, nobody is admitting to thinking that killing off healthy cats, unless there's some evidence of a particular problem, is an appropriate response. That might be your neighbor's cat, right? You don't know anything about that cat. As mentioned, back in the day, many years ago, this is how I started my career. I was an animal control officer. And part of my job was if anybody in Santa Cruz County wanted to trap a cat, whether it was their neighbor's cat or a feral cat, whether it was friendly or fearful or totally unhandleable, they could call me and I would immediately come out for free, pick up that cat, and return it to the shelter. If I couldn't handle it, it was my job to immediately take it in the back, shake it to the bottom of the cage, and give it a lethal injection. So sort of the equivalent of the choice that none of you would make in a response to a cat that you just saw out and about. It was available for free to any citizen and funded by donations to the shelter and taxpayer dollars for animal control. I did that as someone who has loved cats since I opened my eyes and first saw one. I did that as someone who was and is so deeply committed that I wanted to spend my life making things better for cats. I knew about TNR, trap, neuter, and return programs that were just being talked about back in those days in the late 80s and early 90s. But I felt like it wasn't fair to the cat. She might not have access to food, she might be hit by a car, she might get sick, she might get killed by a coyote or poisoned. And it also wasn't fair to the community. I was worried about the birds. I care about all animals. I was worried about people's pet cats, and I thought the diseases that they'd be exposed to if we just let cats out and about to breed and carry on would be a problem for people's pets. And I was an animal control officer, and part of my job was to resolve people's concerns and complaints. And so I did my job, and I did my job with a wholehearted belief that I was doing the right thing. And I went on and I did the shelter medicine residency, and I became the director of the UC Davis Koret Shelter Medicine Program, first program like it in the world, very awesome. And I spent all day, every day, thinking about how to make things better for homeless pets. Part of what I counsel shelters on was how to balance their intake with outcomes when they, oops, battery just died. Anyone got a battery? Stat. I'll just carry on talking. Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah. So it's a routine thing, as it was at the Santa Cruz SPCA, that shelters in the United States take in about 4 cats for every one that's released alive. And most of those cats are healthy on intake. And so we can't keep doing that for very long without euthanizing the difference, right? Otherwise, we quickly have hundreds or thousands of cats in our animal shelters, far more than we can take care of. And I certainly, as a veterinarian, I don't like to see shelters just get more and more crowded until all the cats get sick and then we euthanize them all. Like, that's not right. And so I would counsel people about how to make decisions about euthanasia, even when animals were still healthy, when they were just admitting more than were being released alive. And I never thought as an option of just don't admit more than are released alive. But that was the option, and actually most of you didn't even think about how many were released alive, but you just saw a cat and were like, well, let's just leave it kind of where it is. Seems all right. And looking at research and new programs and new practices, I have come to believe that the way we've done sheltering in the U.S. for the last 140 years, the way I did sheltering myself, the policies that I've promoted and agonized over and advocated and participated in, fundamentally based on a wrong set of assumptions. And that in fact, a dramatically different, better, more humane approach for everybody is something we could choose today. Uh-oh. In light of that, I have to question what I've been doing for the last 24 years of my life. But I'm here to make up for it now. Here's the thing about cats. Which of these things is not like the others? If you saw a cow in your neighbor's yard, you'd be pretty clear that that was probably not appropriate, right? If we saw a colony of Labradors out behind the dumpster at the gym, we would know, like, something's going on there. You'd probably be a lot more willing, if you saw a Labrador kind of running around looking lost by the gym, to go ahead and catch it and bring it to the shelter, right? Or take it home and try to find its owner. But with the cat, we're not sure. Is she a pet? Is she an unowned cat? Does she live out and about? So it's confusing. With the other species that we have in our communities, dog versus coyote, we can tell the difference. One of those is a pet, one of those is a wild, free-roaming, freely breathing animal. Bunny rabbit, pet, right? Naughty jackrabbit, free-roaming animal. We know, it's obvious to us, that a strategy, if we see a bunny rabbit hopping around in our neighbor's yard, we could intervene in that situation. It might be appropriate to bring it to an animal shelter and hope that it either would be rehomed or it would be returned to its owner. When we see naughty jackrabbits running around outside the VMCH, it's clear that a policy of setting out traps for those, driving them to the animal shelter, waiting to see if they tamed down so that we could rehome them, trying to find barn homes for the ones that didn't get tamed, and then after a holding period, euthanizing and disposing of the remaining jackrabbits would not be a successful strategy to control in the interest, the welfare interest of individual jackrabbits. So it's clear for other species, but it's not so clear for cats. And that's really an issue with the way we've practiced sheltering in the U.S. Our sheltering programs have really been designed for pets, right? We offer low-cost spay-neuter services on the assumption that there's an owner to take us up on that offer. We promote microchipping, pet identification. We provide humane education programs for responsible pet ownership. We encourage people to keep their cats indoors or safely confined, all on the assumption that there's a person to hear that message and act on it. We also bring animals into the shelter with the assumption that they could get adopted if they are not reclaimed by their owner. But that's not a valid assumption for jackrabbits, and it's not always a valid assumption for cats. So how has it been working out for us in sheltering in the United States? Well, actually pretty good. These are estimates. Say that euthanasia of animals in the U.S. peaked around 1970 with 23 million animals killed. And based on the population of that at that time, there was 115 animals killed per 1,000 capita. And since that time, we've pushed sterilization. The veterinary profession has gotten involved. Shelters have gotten a lot better. We know more about adoption programs, about pet marketing. We've had years to implement humane education, and we have made progress from 115 per 1,000 capita to under 10, an order of magnitude. Yay! We're winning. But, and it's a big but. By the way, it's fun to search the internet for big cat butt images. But be sure your boss doesn't walk in on you. It's not going so well for cats in recent years. And that probably reflects the fact that we're using a tool designed for pets on a population that is made up increasingly of non-pet animals. So this is feline intake and feline euthanasia, Colorado statewide, 2000 compared to 2007. An increase in euthanasia of over 55% on a per capita basis. Ohio, not quite as dramatic an increase, but geez, look where dogs went. Dramatic decrease in euthanasia per capita, while euthanasia of cats went up. Right here in California, again, dramatic decrease in euthanasia per capita for dogs, while euthanasia per capita for cats went up by almost 25%. We have worked hard in the last 10 years to see that feline euthanasia has actually increased on a per capita and absolute basis during that time is very discouraging. And I wanted to just share kind of one story of maybe someone who picked up a stray cat that was in the yard a couple doors down, was friendly. They were the ones that put it in a carrier and brought it over to the local animal shelter, hoping it would get reclaimed. This is an excerpt from a book on shelter overpopulation. So she was a stray. Very pretty cat, came to the shelter 29 days ago. She didn't have any kittens, but when she was let out of her cage for exercise, she'd run up to the cages of kittens and try to clean them by licking them. This is not actually something we recommend, but it was well intended. Obviously, this person loves cats. On the days that our shelter was closed, I let her out of the cage to stretch. She tried to play with my pen while I tried to do paperwork. 2 weeks ago, she became the cat who had been at our shelter the longest, so I had her photographed and made her Pet of the Week in our local newspaper. Unfortunately, not one person called. No one cared that she was beautiful. No one cared that she got along with dogs and cats. No one cared that she was young, or that she had silky fur, or that she liked to clean kittens, or stretch out on a desk, or play with a pen. And the next day, someone else brought another beautiful, healthy cat to the shelter. This is a picture of her from her paperwork. And so that day, when other unwanted cats came through our door, filling our cat room beyond capacity, I lovingly took her life. I did that myself hundreds of times. Every day that happens, hundreds of times in our state, thousands of times across our country. If you get a chance to look down, this is a picture of one morning's worth of euthanasia at a local shelter. If you can stand to look, you can see who makes up those statistics. A lot of those cats were healthy when they walked in the door. Maybe some of them were so scared that they couldn't be placed for adoption. Maybe some of them got sick from the crowded conditions at the shelter and they couldn't be treated. Maybe some of them were just too young and they needed a little more time, but the shelter couldn't give it to them because of the constant onslaught of cats coming through the door every single day without any ability to limit that or control that, except through this. In California, between 2000 and 2010, we euthanized 2.5 million cats at publicly funded animal shelters. That was over 250,000 in 2010, 756 every single day. We can estimate that about 5,650 are euthanized every day in the United States. What are we spending on that? What's the human cost of the people like me, like the person who wrote that about the cat who loved kittens, people who let cats out of their cages to play with their pen while they're doing their paperwork? What does it mean that we ask these people to work in animal shelters and then to do this? And maybe most importantly, what's the opportunity cost of this? What are we not doing? What are we not thinking of? What creative ideas are we not implementing because we're so busy killing 5,650 cats every day? Why do we do this? It's horrible, right? It hurts. We should have a good reason. I had a good reason when I did this. I loved working in an animal shelter. I loved being an animal control officer. These were our goals. This is what we strived to provide for our communities. We had to abide by our state's laws. We had to do what we were told to do by the people of our state. We were committed to resolving people's complaints and concerns, in part for fear they would take more drastic action if we didn't. We wanted to reunite lost pets with their owners. We wanted to protect the health and welfare of the animals in our shelter. We wanted to find new homes for pets. We wanted to euthanize suffering and dangerous animals. We wanted to reduce the harm associated with free-roaming animals. We wanted to protect birds and little wild animals and pet health and community health. And ultimately, we wanted to solve the problem of too many animals and not enough homes for them. Pretty good goals, right? So I'm going to talk about now how does it work into these goals to take in healthy cats to shelters regardless of the number released alive and euthanize the difference. Does that meet these goals? And if it doesn't, should we stop? It's not a law in California. Shelters don't have to take in cats, so we can check that one right off the list. And it's not a law in most of the United States. Most animal control requirements are targeted at dogs. So, check. Don't have to do that. What about resolving complaints? Well, this was a national survey that said, if you knew that the only two choices were to trap a cat and have it euthanized, or leave the cat alone, over 4 out of 5 people said, oh, well, in that case, leave them alone. So it's true that there was 14% of people who said, no, kill them. And some people who wouldn't admit to an opinion. So those 14% can certainly be very vocal. They can want us to trap and kill cats, but we don't always have to give the most vocal people what they want if it doesn't reflect the general desire of our society. So if we know that 4 out of 5 people who are taxpayers and supporting animal shelters would rather the cats be left where they are, is it really the role of an animal shelter to use taxpayer and donor dollars to act as an extermination service for people who consider cats to be a nuisance? I think not. So can we check that one off our list? What about this one? This was something that really struck me when I was doing my research for this talk. I knew that only about 1 out of 50 cats is reclaimed from a shelter. And that probably partly reflects the fact that a lot of cats that come into shelters just don't have an owner who's looking for them. But it also reflects a real difference in the way that cats behave and the way that people respond when their cat is lost, right? If your dog isn't in your house or in your yard, you really notice right away. If you have an indoor-outdoor cat or an outdoor cat and the cat's not there, you don't panic in an hour and pick up the phone and call the animal shelter, right? The cat might just drift off and be in someone's shed for a while, be in a garage and be scared by a dog and go hide somewhere. So you wait a few days, right? And you don't necessarily call the shelter. You don't necessarily even think to drive down to the animal shelter. So cats are 13 times more likely to return home by some non-shelter means than by a call or visit to an animal shelter. And in the study, 66% of lost cats were found because they returned home on their own. And there's actually several studies now that find a similar percentage. Only 7% were found by a call or visit to a shelter. So if you were one of the ones that picked up that cat and you don't know if it had an owner or not, chances are by bringing it to a shelter, you would reduce the likelihood that it would ever get back home. So we can knock that one off our list for cats. For dogs, it's a different story. The majority of dogs that are lost are returned home by a call or visit to an animal shelter. What about maintaining health and welfare? I study feline upper respiratory infection. That's caused by feline herpes virus, which is a stress-associated disease. How many of you have worked enough in an animal shelter to know how big a deal feline upper respiratory infection is? At a lot of shelters, up to 30% or more of cats end up getting sick. And what that means is not only that are they getting sick, but we are just not doing a good job of protecting their health. Not because we're mean, because we're not. We love cats. But we feel like we have to take in so many of them all at one time to try and save their little furry lives that we have to compromise their welfare, not give them enough room, not give them enough time, not give them the quiet and the space and the attention that they need to really stay well in shelters. So it's not that we can't do these things in shelters, but it's real hard when we're admitting more healthy cats than are released alive. Here's a better one. Find new homes for pets. Look at that. We are doing better in California. About 35,000 more cats adopted out of California shelters in 2010 compared to 2000. And that is, like tomorrow or Friday. It's $5 Friday down at Yolo County Animal Services. Check it out. Get a cheap cat. But we're not making as dramatic progress as we are for dogs. And intake keeps going up too. So here's the full picture in California is that intake went up so much, it outpaced adoptions, and that's why we ended up euthanizing about 75,000 more cats. Here's kind of the good news, bad news about cats, where people get cats. We aren't the only game in town in animal shelters. In fact, we're not the biggest game in town. We get someone to adopt a cat from us, we might be redirecting someone who otherwise would have adopted a stray. which accounts for 34% of where people get their cats. On the other hand, if we leave a cat where it is, there's a decent chance it's going to get adopted. We can be very sure of admitting only cats that will be adopted. We could just only admit them when we have room based on having adopted out a different one. And leaving the cat in the community where it is means it also still has a chance for adoption. Here's a shelter that sort of followed that logic and said, we're not going to admit stray cats unless we have room, and we're only going to make room by adopting cats out. This pie shows the feline outcomes for California shelter cats. So red, that's bad. 71% of cats were euthanized. We're sure that was a bad outcome, right? Unless they were terminally suffering. 22% were adopted, 2% were reclaimed, and 5% were transferred to other organizations for which they presumably had a life. Now this shelter said, we're full, we can't take these cats in, we're going to ask you to wait. And they told 700 people to wait. And they take the cats in. And for 400 of those 700, the cat never came in. And so they did some follow-up to see what happened. Well, 45% of those cats got adopted. So what they created was 400 satellite adoption centers who had a whole lot of friends and coworkers that weren't already saturated to their eyeballs with cats, unlike all of us. Right? So they did a good job. 14% is the percentage, the piece of pie we labeled suckers. They kept the cat. Yay. 2% found the cat's original owner. They did just as good a job as the animal shelter. 6%, they found another organization that would take the cat. So almost exactly the same percentage as the outcome at animal shelters. Less than 1% were hit by cars while they were waiting. So that's the bad outcome we know. 10% the cat vanished. Maybe it went back home. 23% unreachable. So even if we assumed all those cats died, it still would be only about a third of the cats that we know would be euthanized if we do unrestricted intake into an animal shelter. So, we can do a great job of finding new homes for pets, but bringing in more pets than we can find homes for does not serve that goal and probably reduces the overall chances of pets finding homes. Now, this was a big one for me. The specter of, that someone was going to poison that cat, it's going to be tortured to death by teenagers, it's going to be eaten by coyotes, it's going to be terrible. But now we have over 30 years of experience of people bringing feral cats into clinics, fixing them, and putting them back where they were found. And so we've gotten a huge amount of data on what is the condition of feral cats that are out and about, not even spayed and neutered, because they're just coming into the clinic, right? Less than 1% of over 100,000 cats brought to clinics were so sick and injured that at the clinic they thought death would be better. This is true. So the idea that we have to race around scooping cats up off the street because otherwise they're immediately going to suffer terribly, it's just not founded in reality. And, if we think about that jackrabbit, they're subject to all the same risks. We can see that it would be ludicrous to think that we should scoop them up to prevent them from having some kind of future suffering. Just as we would not appreciate anybody scooping us up to prevent us from having heartbreak or injury or disease or death at some unknown future date. You might say that, the cats entering shelters are probably at higher risk. But studies have shown, and if we look at shelter data, this is generally true, less than about 10% of cats entering shelters are sick and injured unless that's a particular focus of that shelter organization. And we did a study where the median body condition score was smack in the middle, 5 out of 9, ideal. Better than the health, the condition score of all our portly cats at home sitting on the couch. Annual survival of cats that had some person providing some care was 90%. Pretty good. That's kind of the rate that some people say is a no-kill shelter. So out there in the world, being a feral cat with somebody handing me some food every once in a while, pretty darn good. Now, for kittens, the rate is lower. Mortality can reach 75%. 1 in 8 lion cubs survives to adulthood. And yet, we don't think that we should just shoot all 8 right at the beginning, right? For sure, if we could offer a home as an alternative, then we should do that. But if we can only offer euthanasia as an alternative, let's think about that. What about dangerous animals? Here again, we have the majority of the American public on the side of not admitting healthy cats to shelters to euthanize them. 71% said shelters should kill only animals too sick or aggressive for adoption. You know, this is a real issue with dogs. Dogs can be dangerous, they can form packs, they can roam the streets, and they can really be a hazard. But as you saw, we're also doing better with reducing canine euthanasia. They have a better chance when they come into shelters. Good news about cats is they rarely form packs and chase down little old ladies or people pushing babies in strollers. And so that really frees us to consider a lot more options for responding to cats than to dogs. And while we're on the subject, I want to talk a little bit about that word euthanasia. So we said, you know, shelters should only euthanize suffering or dangerous animals. I say we euthanize 5,650 cats a day in this country. What does euthanasia mean to you? How do you define that? How is euthanasia defined? Who knows? To stop suffering. What else is a characteristic of euthanasia? In the best interest. So it's usually talked about in a terminal context. Should it be humane? Yes, should be humane. A lethal injection can be humane. Capture, transport, holding in a metal box for 5 days with the sounds of barking dogs, the smell of chemicals, the banging of cage doors, in a cage so small that the litter box and the food are 6 inches apart, and there's feces and urine in the food and water, followed by lethal injection by a caring, loving animal care attendant, is not euthanasia. It's torture. It's killing. I say euthanasia out of respect for the intentions behind that act, behind the people who are tasked with this activity by our society. But I think in all honesty, if people knew what we're talking about is causing severe suffering and then killing animals, there would be a different dialogue about it. So, euthanize, suffering, dangerous, kind of all off the table. So, we need to stop helping cats so much. What about, is your cat making you crazy? What about the risk of toxo or rabies? This was the splashy headline of last year that caused a giant cat panic. Truth? Risk for some diseases is higher in ferals. Risk for some diseases is higher in pets. A lot of conditions that are of concern are also carried by other species, such as raccoons. We know trying to eliminate rabies by rounding up all the raccoons, putting them in animal shelters, tormenting them for 5 days, and then euthanizing them is not going to be successful. So we have other strategies to try and control that illness. If we just said, you know what, killing healthy cats is off the table as a strategy to protect the public from toxoplasmosis, what else could we do? Are our hands tied? Name something you could do to protect the public from toxoplasmosis. Yeah. Make people wash hands after they pick up cat shit. Right? Where else could they wash their hands? After gardening? Is that a good idea anyway? Yeah. Because, like, a raccoon also could be pooping in your garden. And they carry Baileys asterisk, and that's really nasty, right? That'll make you crazy really fast. So, you know, we can encourage people to not eat undercooked or raw meat, right? Wash their hands. These things are more broadly protective against just a pathogen that might be shed for a few days by one cat out of, you know, a fraction of its entire life. If people are out there not washing their hands, they're going to have more problems than just toxoplasmosis infection. And then this is really, you know, this is the big one. When I talk to people about, like, why don't we just stop killing the cats instead of killing the cats? They're like, but what about the birds? And this is, you know, that cousin king is deadlier than you think. The evil that stalks, kills, and purrs. And the response to this has been, we gotta kill the cats. That was the headline. Bird group, kill the cats. Actually, I mean, there's issues with this science and the way that these conclusions were arrived at. So that's a whole other debate. Come to Shelter Medicine Rounds, we're going to be talking about that paper in the next month or so. But whether they, you know, undoubtedly they kill some animals. You know, we've seen it. But they don't just kill endangered species. They kill the species that are present, you know, sort of in proportion to their numbers. And some studies have shown, yes, there's a reduction in species abundance and diversity where there's a dense population of cats. Other studies have shown, wow, when we removed all the cats, other non-native species, rats proliferated, competed for food, or also preyed upon the native birds more successfully, and the overall effect of removing the cats was detrimental. It could go either way. What we know is that any kind of intervention is going to depend on a very specific microhabitat. You can't just evaluate your neighbor's yard 2 yards down and say, in this situation we should kill a cat, in this situation we should leave the cat, right? And if removal is going to be a successful strategy, it has to be sweeping. It has to remove a sufficient percentage, and it has to be maintained. You can't just add cats back in there, or you just wasted all your time. How could we protect wildlife if killing cats was not an option? Hands tied? Oh no, all the birds are going to be gone in a year? And I don't say this to be flippant. I say this to say, what are we not thinking about because we're so busy arguing about the cats? What could we do? Keep the cats indoors, but not if they're feral. Yeah.
On vid, there is some talk about getting some people to build outdoor enclosures for some of the colonies of cats.
That would be awesome. We probably can't do that for all the cats, and I'm going to talk about how many cats there are.
In some communities where they found, in some communities they really found that TNR was working for them, so they kind of combined that with just the old method of trapping and killing some. And this was described in Florida, where there's the issue of the Florida panther is endangered and feral cats are spreading.
So maybe in areas where the Florida panther is endangered, then it would be reasonable to either try to remove all the cats to a confined place, or, you know, that's a microhabitat specific concern. But all across America, in your neighbor's yard, in the alley behind my house, at the dumpster, by the gym, realistically, let's just say We can't kill those cats. So, you know, we could create pens at the dumpster behind the gym and in an alley behind my house. Is there anything we could do that has nothing to do with cats? That would protect the abundance and diversity of wildlife? Like, that's what we're concerned about, right? However we get there, just like however we protect people's health. Yeah?
I was just going to say, for more effort as a conservation, like building nests for certain species of birds in different areas. Like you said, the invasive species are going to come in and hurt them as well. So rather than focusing on just cats,
Thank you.
like all of the
Habitat. That is something any one of us can do. We can research which native species are in our area, which are at risk, what kind of plants we can place that would attract, you know, that would either attract that species or attract the insects that that species feeds on. We can provide nesting boxes. That will protect birds from all kinds of threats. That will support abundance and diversity of populations much more globally than snatching up your neighbor's cat that may or may not have preyed upon a native bird, might have killed a starling that might have competed with a native bird for a resource. So there's lots of ways that we can protect species instead of investing all these billions in capturing and killing cats. Maybe we invest wrongly in understanding the habitat threats and how to protect the species that we're concerned about. At the same time that in specific situations, then we have the resources to really study, okay, like here's the Florida panthers, here's some endangered sea otters, we're really concerned that there's feral cats near here. What can we do about this targeted, specific situation? Yeah?
But do you have any thoughts on how, you know, we create these preserves but then how do we protect those from not just, let's just say not just cats, but all these invasive predators? You know, we create the preserves and then the predators say, oh good, you just made a great place to grow food.
The question is, I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but the issue is if we create these preserves, and then how do we keep the cats out? And it's not just the cats, but other predators and other competing non-native species as well, and pollution and everything else. And that is a serious, complex societal problem to be solved. What I'm saying is that killing random cats in communities that may or may not be anywhere near those species in a way that's not targeted to protect those species is an important distraction to answering the kinds of questions that you're asking. So I don't have the answer. I'm just saying taking this sort of illusory answer away will help us to really grapple with those issues in a meaningful context. So, reality check. Shelter intake is not the result of a strategic analysis of risks posed by free-roaming cats to wildlife. It is initiated by citizens who are either annoyed or worried about a cat. It is initiated on a random day of the year, not prior to the breeding season, after the breeding season, in the middle of the breeding season. And it's expensive. It's expensive to catch, transport, hold, euthanize, dispose of, and send the bodies away. In New Zealand, where cats are a much more acute threat because there's a lot of ground-dwelling native species that have never had a predator, they try hard using efficient, lethal methods in the field. These papers are as much as 20 or 30 years old, and guess what? This is from the internet. Last week, New Zealand still overrun with cats. So if we wanted to kill all the cats, we would have to ramp it up, and we'd have to do it much more efficiently. And we're not going to do that. We're just not. We live in a society where 71% of people think shelters should not euthanize animals unless they're suffering or dangerous. We're not going to go out there and shoot cats with poison darts. And bottom line, we just don't do enough of it to really have an impact. And this is a really interesting series of articles that was in the Sacramento Bee last summer. There's some question about whether lethal control of coyotes is an effective method. We're used to it. If you're a frustrated livestock producer who's lambs were just killed by a coyote, maybe it feels really good to say, darn it, I want that coyote killed. But the truth is, we're realizing it just doesn't work, so we can keep doing it, humane or not. It's not effective. Marin, bless their liberal selves, outlawed it 10 years ago. And here is a rancher who's not a coyote advocate. We're pretty much learned how to control coyotes on our own, said Jensen, whose losses to coyotes have declined 60 to 70%. Anything that can help you 24 hours a day, like electric fencing, is a good thing. So that's like habitats. That's like washing your hair. These are things that are non-specific. They don't rely on catching a predator at a particular time and eliminating a sufficient number of the predators from the population. If you've got one coyote left and you don't have good fences, that coyote's going to get your lambs. So we come down to one last thing. If we stop racing around taking the cats, are we going to be buried within weeks to years by a sea of cats that rises up over our heads and suffocates us? Well, we know from mathematical models that 75 to 95% of cats have to be trapped, neutered, and returned in order to control a population. That's a daunting number, and we can't always reach that level of control, hence the failure of trap, neuter, and return in some situations. But euthanizing cats is not magic. It's more efficient, but it still has to reach about 50% of the free-roaming cat population. Now, using the same numbers that were used in that bird study, we can estimate that there's about one unowned cat for every 6 people in America, every 6 people in a community. Here's the breakdown in California. This is the percentage of cats that are outdoor pet cats. This is the percentage of cats that are outdoor community cats. This purple piece of pie is cats impounded and euthanized, and this green piece of pie is cats impounded and released alive. What do you think? Could we stop? Would it make a darn bit of difference? If we took out that purple piece of pie and just kept the green one, it would be so much more fun to work in a shelter. And it wouldn't make a difference to feline overpopulation. It just wouldn't. So this is California data intake versus DOA pickups. So we can say maybe DOA pickups is a sort of measure of how many cats are out and about in the community. And so as we would expect, actually in shelters where intake is higher and euthanasia is higher, in those same communities, there's more cats picked up dead on the roads. So it's certainly not decreasing the number of cats that are out and about. And this is so interesting. San Jose started a program a few years ago where instead of taking in healthy cats and euthanizing them, they take them in, they take out their reproductive parts, and then they work with a rescue group to put them back where they're found. And so this blue line is feline euthanasia. Right here is where they started the program. This pink line is cats that got the heck out alive and got put back where they were found. Are they overrun by cats? This is their DOA pickup. Program started in the middle of this time period. So certainly no evidence that the free-roaming cat population has increased, and actually pretty decent evidence that the free-roaming cat population has declined as a result of this program. So here's the bottom line, and then I'll get to the good news, my last 5 minutes. Sheltering, admitting more healthy cats than are released alive, is just not a good tool to solve the problems we're trying to solve. And I liken it to using a hairdryer to try and hammer in a nail, and a hammer to try and dry your hair. It hurts, and it doesn't work. How about if we just stop? and euthanasia tables just sit empty in animal shelters across the world. We could just stop. 2 ways. If we were going to have to kill a cat, we could just fix it and put it back where it was found instead. If we've got the money to do that. Or we could just only take in cats that we can find homes for. And when we find homes for one, we can take in another. And the rest of them get sorted out on their own. And then we can take the resources that we weren't spending on impounding and killing cats on doing other things that would protect cats, that would protect birds, that would protect people, that would help us create the communities that we really want to live in. And we're doing this more and more. Are you guys familiar with shelter-based trap, neuter, return programs? A lot of you are. So instead of catching cats out in the community and taking them to a clinic and then putting them back, we just take the cats that already came into the shelter and say, hey, this one's feral, or maybe it's just scared, but we can't find it at home. So we're going to fix it. We're going to put it back. That's like the San Jose program. We vaccinate them, so we increase the pool of vaccinated cats out there in communities. We directly impact the nuisance cats that were coming to the attention of the shelter, and so maybe that's why intake has gone down in San Jose since this program was implemented. We protect the cat welfare because they're not going to be fighting and mating and having babies. And we're sure, 1 for 1, there's a direct effect on shelter euthanasia. Right? Instead of just fixing a feral cat that was out in the community and hoping that its offspring won't come to the shelter, we know we're going to save a life by fixing this cat. And this was the projected census, daily population census at a shelter that implemented this. So it went from between 200 and 300, sometimes over 300, to between 1 and 200 after implementation of the program. So cut the census by half. That meant twice as much space, twice as much time, twice as much care for every cat that didn't qualify for the program. And this was the effect on the live release rate for that same shelter. And I'm just going to race through. I want to show you what's going on around here. So these are just communities that have implemented these types of programs. What if this happened in Yolo County? This is 3 years of euthanasia compared to live release for Yolo County Animal Services, the only shelter in our county. Does that look good? No, that is sad. This is last year. Started doing community cats in September. October, November, December, sort of opposite. If we can keep that up, we can live in a really different county for cats. We can have a really different feeling about calling the animal shelter, and it would feel really different for people who work there to go into work every morning. And this is sort of the last option. What if we can't afford TNR? Or we can't afford TNR for every cat. Just Sutter County, they're not swimming in dollars. Their live release rate was 13%. 13%. They had more cats dying in their cages because of the conditions in the shelter than they were able to adopt out. They didn't have the money, they didn't have a surgery clinic, they didn't have a vet on staff, they couldn't start TNR. And so we suggested to them they just stop. Just don't take in feral cats. They printed it in the paper, Sutter County Shelter, to stop accepting healthy stray cats. Printed it far before I was ready for them to actually enact this. If the cat's suffering, if it's a menace to society, they'll still take it in. If it's an orphan, if it's sick, they'll still take it in. But the thought was, instead of just bailing this rushing river with your little tin cup, just stop doing the thing that is not helping, and step back. This is their shelter when we visited. These cages were so small the cats couldn't even really stand erect and hold their little tails up. They were dark, they were filthy, there was cats in this row, this row, this row, and this row. In September and October of 2011, they euthanized 337 cats. Here's how it looked after they implemented the policy. Empty. Since then, they rolled those cages out because they were not humane for anything other than spay, neuter, surgery, recovery. They euthanized 31 cats. And in the time that they weren't euthanizing cats, they had time to set up a relationship with UC Davis so they could get some of their animals spayed and neutered before adoption. They had time to set up rescue partnerships with the San Francisco SPCA so that some of their animals can get adopted that way. They had time to work with us to improve animal care at the shelter. They're not there yet, but because they stopped bailing that river, at least they're on the path to get there. We know, in fact, we have long known, that cats are not a fragile species. And this is from a book on cats. After the cataclysm, out of the mounds of heaped up earth, the piles and wrecks of half-buried cities, the desolated fields of grain and the tortured orchards, the cat will stalk, confident, self-reliant, capable, imperturbable, and philosophical. If we just let cats do their thing, cats will be okay. I'm happy to stay and answer questions. I know some of you have to go to class. Thank you so much.